Yeah, so went and lived in Palestine. I lived in Bethlehem, in a little town called Beit Sahor in the West Bank. I went from August of last year just until July of this year. I just got back July 19th. Yeah, obviously feel very strongly about the things that are happening these days, about the conversations people are having regarding this topic. And it felt appropriate for me to come and share a little bit about my experiences and the things I saw and my understanding on the issues. Obviously, I'm not coming here as any kind of like scholar or anyone who's like studied the issues, just as someone who knows people there, who met people and has his understanding sort of informed on those bases. Also, like obviously, it's a bit of an intense topic. If I start to feel a little bit emotional, it's all good. Yeah, so I'll just share, just some of the thoughts that I have about it. So I was there with Mennonite Central Committee. I know a lot of people here might be familiar with the work that they do. They do really great peace-building work. They partner with local organizations in the countries they're in. They've been like 40 plus countries, just doing self-sustaining work with the local population. And so that's what they were doing in the West Bank. And so I was supporting people who had mental disabilities in Bethlehem. And so MCC was providing them funds, was giving them help and volunteers and all kinds of stuff to help them with that. And so that itself was a very transformative experience. I was living with an Arabic family while I was there. I was learning the language. I was grocery shopping, like trying to be as fully immersed as I could be in the local culture. So I'll give a little bit of an understanding of what that was like, maybe from a bit of a difficult standpoint living there, and then transition into talking about the positive elements of it. So I'll say that, so I was in the West Bank, and so Palestine has sort of been divided into, there's the Gaza Strip, which a lot of people are familiar with, and then there's the West Bank. So the West Bank isn't connected to the Gaza Strip necessarily. I mean, like, just locationally. They have no tie-ins with the group Hamas or anything like that. They're really just a lot of local people just sort of living their lives. And there's a big wall that the government of Israel built around the West Bank, which the UN has declared illegal. But the wall is there, and it's to separate the Palestinian people from any body of water. And it's also to give the Israeli government control over where the Palestinians go. They give them IDs, they give them passes and stuff like that, whether or not they're allowed to leave Palestine. And they control the water and the electricity that goes into the West Bank. And so unless the families are like wealthy enough to have additional stores of water, things can just be cut off at a moment's notice. And so living in that way, the way in which it affected people I know there, obviously quite intense. There's a lot of dogs that roam the area. My understanding is that in the past or currently happening, IDF soldiers would take just sort of stray dogs that they found in Israel, bring them into Palestine at nighttime, and there's walls so they can't escape, and then the dogs are just there. Now they've bred, and you can't really go out at night very safely because there'll just be dogs roaming the streets. And so I like to go on runs. I would try to run at night, and I would end up being chased by dogs, and so I needed to run during the day, which, not the worst thing in the world. I had become a morning person, which wasn't easy for me, but, I'm trying to keep those good habits. So there was another location that I was going to volunteer at, but then it was declared unsafe, where it's a refugee camp, Ada refugee camp, and there's a day center for children to go to after school to be able to just play or do activities and things like that. And it is known as the most tear-gassed spot in the world. And so Israeli soldiers will fire tear gas canisters into that area just as sort of a testing ground, or they'll spray something called skunk water, which is this really foul-smelling black liquid, which sticks to people's clothes and skin. And it happens often enough that I would get like weekly warnings from the UN, like avoid this place, avoid this location, because like shootings are happening and there's all this stuff going on. That refugee camp has a sign when you enter it that says, "Welcome to the most tear-gas spot in the world." And there are businesses that make flower pots and necklaces out of the canisters that like are laying around. So it's literally contributing at this point to the economy. Just how oppressed this place is. And I would very often have conversations with people who knew people who were very recently kidnapped, or like I had talked to a coworker of mine who, so I asked her how her weekend was, and she said that over the weekend, close childhood friends of hers has been taken by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. This happens just sort of at a moment's notice without any reason given. So it was like 5 a.m. and this guy was like 19, he was taken. And when this happens, there's no court date immediately scheduled, and this person is just detained. And I asked her if she knew anyone else that this had happened to, and it had happened to her father and her brother. And it took 2 years for them to release her father. And when these things happen, usually the charges put against the people who are taken is that they were throwing rocks or something of the like, which it gives some kind of justification for the Israeli Defense Forces to be doing this. But then my organization is very deeply invested in these kinds of instances, and so they saw the video footage there was a case where they said this 9-year-old kid had been throwing rocks, and so this kid was detained and harassed by soldiers, and all this stuff happened. And then we saw the video, and the kid had just walked by the security camera and stuck his tongue out at it. And then that was enough reason for soldiers to come and detain this kid. And so it's just a lot done to keep the Palestinian people on their toes and to make them just sort of feel like no moment is safe or nowhere is safe. And the intention behind that is so that they will leave. And a lot of young people are leaving because they're seeking better lives for themselves. And so there will be more room for Israeli settlers, and more people will be able to come in and take the land that the Palestinian people have had for hundreds of years. I will say that, so despite the fact that living there is incredibly challenging, and there's no infrastructure, there's no really anything for young people to do. So there was a YMCA, and there were a bunch of cafes, and other than that, there was no outlet. And so young people couldn't go to the movie theater. There was no real outlet for art or anything. There's small sort of grassroots organizations, but there's a lot withheld from them. And there's no street cleaning services. There's garbage mostly everywhere you go. The roads are in great state of disrepair. They're very narrow. You can't see for a very long way when you're there. And it's very intentionally made that way so that people don't feel like it's sustainable to live there. And then the minimum wage is very, very low, and so people usually need more than one job, and so the local teacher would also be the local supermarket clerk, or they need to be able to try to keep themselves afloat because grocery prices are incredibly high, which is it was a big shock to me when I went there, and they're about as high as they are here in Canada, but the minimum wage is 11 shekels an hour, which translates to $3 or $4 an hour. And so you see that and you think, how is this sustainable? But one of the most amazing things is when I went to the town of Beit Sahor, which is 14,000 people in the governance of Bethlehem, I realized there's no homeless people. And I thought that was shocking. And I was like, how can there be no homeless people if this is the state of things? And it's because the culture is such where if you let someone go homeless, it's seen as very shameful. And so everyone takes each other in and they try to make it work collectively. And that spirit really resonates with people who stay there. And so there will be entire families living on one street. And so I was living with a family where I was living with the grandparents, and then the kids lived upstairs, and the grandkids lived downstairs. And every Sunday, the whole family gets together for a big meal, a big Thanksgiving-like meal. And it was shocking just to see all of these family members together all the time, just supporting each other and coming together for community. The sense of community is incredible. And I'll say that translates very well to foreigners as well. So everywhere I went when I was in Bethlehem, or in Palestine in general, I felt very safe and taken care of by the Palestinians. And so everywhere I went, I was asked how I was doing. I was asked if I needed anything. It was impossible for me to walk anywhere, especially in the rain, because I would be offered rides everywhere I went. So I was trying to get anywhere, and it started to rain. Someone I didn't know would stop and insist I go with them and that they would take me where I needed to go. And that it worked like clockwork. Or I would go into a local shop, and I would just try to buy something, and they would say, "Yeah, let's sit down." They would have a pot of coffee ready, and then they would insist that they treat me to some coffee, and then I would ask to buy something like a hat, and then occasionally they would say, "Just take it." And I was like, "No, I want to give your business money. What are you doing?" But then they would insist that I do that because it's a very hospitable, honor-based culture, and that really you feel that while you're there. It was different when I was in Israel, it was quite tense whenever I made my way over to Jerusalem. And a lot of people ask, like, what do you mean Israel? Like, aren't they sort of in the same location? It is very confusing, and it also varies depending on who you ask, right? So you ask someone who's extremely Israeli, pro-Israel, then they'll tell you the whole thing is Israel. Or you'll ask someone from Palestine, and they'll tell you, like, it's all occupied Palestine, right? And so the border kind of changes depending on who you ask. But internationally, it's kind of recognized that the wall, well, I don't know if the wall is even internationally recognized. It was declared illegal. It was built in just the late 1900s. But there are borders separating the West Bank from Jerusalem. And so Palestinians need a pass to go from the West Bank to Jerusalem. Whenever I was in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or just sort of anywhere in Israel, that is sort of where I felt the tension most, because there are soldiers everywhere. There's IDF soldiers, young people, like 19, 20 years old, who carry automatic guns, and you see them everywhere you go. And then you see Palestinian people get harassed. And so I saw someone, like a Palestinian teenager, who was like pushed off a train while I was there. I saw like just older people get harassed by soldiers, or like a Palestinian woman trying to go through like a rotating carousel to get in, and the 19-year-old soldier was bored, and she kept on like taking his finger off the button to let her through, and so she was stuck in the carousel, and he was just kind of messing with her. Like you see a lot of cruelty, which I think is just reflected in the fact that when one people group is dehumanized and oppressed to a certain extent, it really translates into cruelty by the local populace. And I'll say that that's very much by design. So it's illegal for Israeli citizens to enter Palestine. And there are big red signs that say, like, warning, if you enter this place, it's illegal for you, it's dangerous for your life, like, you can't go in through here. And so Israeli citizens have a wide berth towards the Palestinians, and then they're able to believe that anything happening against them is sort of a justifiable retaliation to what the Palestinians might be doing. And it's been working. And so like the Israeli citizens are disconnected from what's happening, and I would say the international community is disconnected from the greater story and what's really happening down there. I'll share a story where I was with two Palestinian friends of mine, and they really just wanted to see the ocean. Like there's nothing to do in Palestine. And so they're around my age, they're 26 and 28, and they wanted to go to Tel Aviv, and they got passes where now less than half the people who apply are given passes to go to Tel Aviv, but they got some. And they were only allowed to go in for a month, and they need money, so they work every single day of the week. But they found time on Sunday after church to go to Tel Aviv, and so I went with them. And we made it, we got there at around 4 p.m., and we were in the train station, and then two young Israeli soldiers came up to us and asked us to follow them. Which we did, and we were asking them, like, hey, is there anything wrong? They wouldn't talk to us. They took us into a stairwell, and they just told us to sit down. We were there, and then I started asking, like, hey, like, is there anything we can do? Like, what's wrong? And they told me, like, if you want to leave, you can leave, because I'm Canadian. They weren't going to detain me, but I decided to stay with my friends. And so we were sitting together, and eventually they let us know, we think you have the wrong passes, and so we're going to call the police to, like, come and see you guys. And then my friends were insisting, like, we have the right passes, like, we've entered before with these passes, can we show you? And the soldiers wouldn't look at them. And so for 2 hours, sat there. They weren't allowed to stand up, they weren't allowed to walk around, and the soldiers were armed, and so there wasn't much they could do. And eventually they let us go, but at that point it was dark, and we all had to work the next day. And so I asked them, like, do you guys still want to go to the beach? Like, it's getting dark. And they said, yes, like, we're going to the beach. And I was like, okay. And we got there at 9 p.m., and it was empty, but we still got there. And we looked at the water for a while, and then we made our way back. But the reason I share that story is because I was very angry when all of that was happening. And the soldiers kind of noticed, and they were teasing me a little bit. They were saying, like, why don't you smile? Like what are you so frustrated about? But my friends were just magnanimous, and they handled the situation with a lot of respect towards the Israeli soldiers, and they were saying, yes, of course, like, whatever we need to do. And afterwards, I was impressed, but I was surprised almost, and I was like, how can you guys, like, maintain such composure when this is happening to you? And my friend said, it is our responsibility to reflect on all Palestinians. And so if people see us get angry, whether or not it's justifiably, they will equate that with Palestinian terrorism, or they will then say, oh, these Palestinians, they're a problem and they need to be dealt with. And so they see it as their responsibility to uphold the image of their people, especially in Israel. And so I just realizing that and learning about the burden that they bear in that regard was quite intense. Yeah, but I'll talk a little bit now on my understanding of what's been going on recently over the past month or so. So while I was at a celebration, which I'll say really quickly as an aside, there's a lot of celebrations because they try to take moments, any moment that they can, to sort of celebrate and have levity. So we would be in a cafe, and then they would suddenly turn the music down and say, hey guys, we're having a party now, so everyone gets a free drink, and we're going to turn up the music, and we're all going to do that. And so we would just like dance and stuff in this random cafe for the moment, because they need to take those moments that they can to celebrate something and to appreciate each other's company. And so I was at a dinner, and then we found out that evening there was a raid in Jenin refugee camp, which is also in the West Bank. And the soldiers had showed up just late at night, and 12 Palestinians had been killed, and so mostly younger people, but then also some older people. And over 100 had been shot and injured. And this occurred, it was the biggest raid in over a decade. And I messaged my friends and I messaged the people I know, and I was like, this just happened, like, have you heard of it? And no one had any idea. So there was no international awareness that this had taken place, because the state of Israel, as Palestine, in such a lockdown, they're not able to spread this kind of news, and so they weren't telling anyone. And I was trying to just let people know that this had occurred, but it wasn't on the international consciousness. Then the next day, a Palestinian came into a synagogue in Jerusalem and shot 6 Israelis in retaliation for what had occurred. And this blew up, and this became a very big international story. And so everyone I knew messaged me to make sure I was okay. People were talking about this terrorist and how could this happen, this unprovoked action. And then I was just like, this is entirely in retaliation to what they had done before, and twice as many people had been killed the day before, and a completely not justified action. So it was very frustrating. But then in response to this, the Israeli government arrested over 50 of this man's family members, and then they demolished over 100 Palestinian homes to make room for settlers. And that cycle I saw perpetuated over and over and over while I was there, where Israel would put Palestinians in a situation where it is unsustainable, inhospitable living, where their people are getting kidnapped and killed almost every day. So in 2022, I think a Palestinian citizen was killed every day for 100 days or something like that. This stuff is just constantly happening, and Palestinians have no way of protesting or getting their voice heard. And the only way they can protest is by having what's called a day of rage, which would happen, if not every week, every 2 weeks, where every business would close just in solidarity for the martyrs, and then that hits the economy. And so it's very hard for them to know how to express any kind of anger about what's been happening, because all of this has been happening since 1948. So it's been going on for over half a century. And so when this occurs, when this kind of thing happens, and a Palestinian does retaliate, or someone who's maybe 19, whose grandfather was born into a refugee camp, whose father and mother were kidnapped by the IDF, whose family has been martyred or killed by Israeli soldiers, someone who has felt wronged by the Israeli government for his entire life comes and commits an atrocity and kills some Israeli civilians, Israel is able to take that and say, look, we're being attacked, these actions are justified. And then they're able to come in and take out more homes and sort of just try. So the words that they use is cleanse of the Palestinians or alleviate the Palestinian problem or things like that, which is where you can kind of see where the mindset is at. And so I would say that incident in Jenin is sort of lends to my understanding of the Hamas attacks that happened just over a month ago, where there's this nation that's incredibly densely populated, where over half the population is children, and everything I just said has been happening to them at a higher extent because Hamas is in the Gaza Strip. Hamas is not in the West Bank, so what they experience is horrible, but what Gazans experience is far worse. This has been happening, and it's been unreported every day for over half a century, When that is the case, it creates a powder keg. And then when it explodes and a terrorist organization comes and attacks Israeli civilians, Israel is able to take that incident and say, look, we've been attacked, it's unprovoked, now we need to do something about it. And now they've killed over 10,000 Palestinians in Gaza. They're bombing hospitals, they're bombing schools, they've been killing journalists. Like, these are things that have been happening over the period of time, and now it's at a far accelerated rate, and they're able to have international support. And these are the things that, like, all the Palestinians I know have just been, like, essentially trying to scream at the top of their lungs to help people understand what's been happening. And it's incredibly difficult to have gained that understanding and then come to a place where people don't understand or people don't get it. But I also do appreciate the fact that, like, I was ignorant to this until just a couple years ago. Like, I had no idea what was happening. I saw hashtag Free Palestine, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, aren't they in the same? Isn't it complicated? Like, I don't really get what's going on over there. And it took literally going and meeting people and seeing events taking place to have a better understanding of what was going on. And so there's no anger in my heart for anyone who doesn't understand, because how could you? Because I feel like the government of Israel has done such a good job of trying to paint it a certain way and have people think that these actions against the Palestinians are justified. But that's why I would really encourage just conversation, and also just taking a moment if you see a news story about something that's talking about something horrific that the Palestinian people have done. Because there were claims going out about what Hamas had done after the attacks, and people were running with it. And I'm not going to say exactly what it was here. I see there's like some little kids here. I don't want this to get too intense, but horrible things that Hamas had done, which like 3 or 4 weeks later, the Times of Israel released a statement saying some of those were actually based on hearsay, some of those weren't actually true, but then by that point the damage had been done, and people were running with it and talking about it. And so it is really challenging seeing it this way, but yeah, I would encourage conversation. I would encourage people to admit to ignorance, because what other perspective would you be able to have if you haven't been informed on the issue? And to try to understand what's been going on, and listening to some Palestinian voices on the issue. I'll say, if you're looking to donate, if you're looking to give any kind of money, the PCRF, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, is always looking for money in order to give to children in Gaza. Every day, more and more is going on. Or if you're looking to volunteer or help, or go to a rally or something, or go to a talk, or if that's more your speed. There's a number of groups you can get involved with. I'll mention the Palestinian Youth Movement is a big group in Kitchener and Toronto, Hamilton. It's really all over the place. And they're there to just sort of raise awareness for what's been going on, and to try to give some accountability for the countries being complicit with the genocide happening in Gaza right now. You can search Palestinian Youth Movement on Google. You can look them up on Instagram. I'm not going to go over all the different organizations now, because I feel like less is more sometimes with this. But if you want to come up to me afterwards and talk to me about it. And also, if you want to hear me talk more about this, I just was on an episode of a podcast called Pardon My Passion. You can look it up on Spotify. Or if you want to talk to me afterwards, and I can give you a link or something to look into that. So, yeah, I appreciate being able to come up here and talk about it. I know that it sets a very somber tone for the morning, but I appreciate everyone listening, and please feel free to come up and ask more questions. Thank you so much.